Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Slavin. I'm the acting director of the Future of Iran initiative at the Atlantic Council, which is a major and growing think tank in Washington, D.C. And I'm also Washington correspondent for the Al-Monitor website, which many of you may be familiar with. We do a lot of coverage of Iran and of Iranian issues. I'm very excited about this panel. This is a terrific opportunity to get some on-the-ground knowledge from European diplomats who are stationed in Iran and who have witnessed all the changes that have been occurring and the changes that have not been occurring over the last few months. So you have their bios, but we have, we have Ambassador Peter Tejler from Sweden, we have Ambassador Giulio Haas from Switzerland, we have Ambassador Susanna Terstal from the Netherlands, and finally Ambassador Francois Delhaye from Belgium. And I'm going to ask them a couple of questions to start the conversation off, and then we'll welcome your questions. Let's see if I can do this without falling off the stage, which is not a good way to start. Okay. Okay, I'm going to start with a question for each of the ambassadors, and we'll just run down the line. And that is, give the audience your impressions of what have the changes been in the business climate since implementation day in particular, and what are the challenges that you see for the businesses from your countries? So we'll start with the Swedish ambassador.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. The question is, of course, one of the real relevant ones. For it has changed the atmosphere, definitely. It has also changed the expectations. And on the expectation side, you have expectations on what we can deliver. And I think the debate about the bank is a good example of this. But it also has created expectations on the Iranian economy by Iranians, on the Iranian side. And there is this frustration and lack of understanding that it may take longer than 3 months and a few days to get everything back in order. I think that is in short, the take that I do.
Ambassador Haas.
Well, I think my work has changed tremendously. I'm most probably the best paid tour guide in Iran. At the very moment, we have an endless tsunami of official delegations coming. I think we are what I call in the real test phase. Everybody wants to come, testing the ideas of the market. Like Peter says, expectation management is occupying us, all of us, but the mood is much more positive than it was 2 years ago. So I think we have achieved some small incremental steps in the right direction.
For me, it's very hard to compare Iran to previous of the DCPOA because I only came after. But I'm certainly, compared to my colleagues in other countries, one of the busiest ambassadors because we get a lot of trade delegations. So the mood is very positive. And I see as well that the Iranian government, they have a very clear idea of where they want to go. What I see as challenges, well, we talked a lot about the banking sector, and I'm sure we will talk about it later as well. That is certainly one of them. Another one is that I see is that there's not enough money in the country, and the Iranian government is looking for private companies to bring in all the money. Now, our companies work a little bit different European companies, I mean, than, for instance, some of the Asian countries where credit lines are established. So this I see as a challenge as well.
Okay.
Well, same as for my colleagues, there was a huge interest also before the agreement was signed, and of course lots of expectations from both sides. Belgian companies were very eager to re-enter the Iranian market because they have been active, many of them, since a very long time in Iran. And now the challenge for our government and the embassy is accompanying these companies to just implement plans so that it doesn't stay at signing MOUs and letters of intention and whatever, but just having some really concrete investment made and trade deals done. So this is really why we are working also on this, investment, bilateral investment guarantee. We are working on this bilateral also, trade improvement things. So a number of bilateral treaties have to be signed. That's a challenge. The other challenge, exactly as Susanna said, it is a lack of financing, which is probably now the greatest obstacle, to doing business and signing contracts in Iran. Yeah.
Let me continue on the banking and financing issue and stay with you, Ambassador. What is the biggest problem as you see it? Why are the large European banks not coming back in? Is it continued US sanctions, particularly the restrictions on even tangential touching of the dollar? Is that the issue? Is it reputational risk? Is it FATF? Why aren't they coming in?
Well, clearly, this is part of the reasons. We should also not underestimate the fact that as Iran has been cut off from the Western banking system, let us say, for quite a while, it takes time for people to start working together again. And there is also a lot of work which has to be done internally by Iranian banks and in the Iranian financial sectors in general. But it's not only banking. I think within Iran there is a lack now of money. There is just a shortage of finance available.
But they have all those frozen billions or unfrozen billions, yeah?
Which are frozen, which are still frozen or being unfrozen, but definitely not enough compared to the level of ambition that they have.
Ambassador, would you add to that? What is the issue? Do you want the U-turn, which has been a big issue in the United States, so that Iran can convert rupees into euros?
Well, I see it actually as 3 points. We talked a lot about this already, the American sanctions that are still in place. We heard talks about a primal fear of our banks, and the Iranian banks lost 10 years of being with the international system. What my government is trying to do is to work on all these 3 issues. So we're talking to the US together with the other EU countries. I think that's a very important point. We are working with the Iranian central bank and Iranian banks to make sure that they don't only have the laws in place, but that also the implementation is in place. And we hope that then those 2 measures will also add to having our own banks more confident in working with the Iranian banks. And then I think it won't be fixed in 2 or 3 months, but a year and a half, then everything should be working normally.
Yeah. Ambassador Haas, I want to add to that the question that was asked of the chairman of Pasargad Bank. What do you want to hear from Jarrett Blank tomorrow morning? What more should the U.S. be doing that it's not already doing? Because we've heard John Kerry say, it's fine for banks to do business in Iran.
I think they already did quite a lot. They visited Switzerland twice or 3 times in the last year, explaining the rules. And I think contrary to some perceptions I have heard when I had a chat with some of the participants. I think, like one of the eminent lawyers said this morning, the rule book is pretty clear. There is not a lot of totally unanswerable questions. What one has to bear in mind is that Iran is still perceived as a big political risk, not least pertaining to the policies vis-à-vis the US. And the boards of big banks have to weight the political risk against an economic profit-making opportunity which is clearly there. And not very surprisingly, they have not made up their mind that there is enough money to be made now in Iran to risk the whole reputational damage out there if they do something wrong. Like Susanna said, I think it will take some time. We need patience, like always when you deal with Iran. But I'm not overly concerned that most of these issues will not be sorted out after a reasonable period of time.
Ambassador Tejler, would you agree?
I would agree. I would just like to add one thing. There is also a few things that need to be clear, and that is old arrears. It's not only the banks, as you know. You also have the credit guarantee boards, export credit guarantee boards, and there are arrears that are still not cleared. And that's an issue I know for the one in Sweden is still an outstanding problem that is hampering the ability for the banks to act. You need the export credit guarantee boards as well, not only the banks.
Mm-hmm. Going back again, now starting with you, you see Asians, certainly Asian companies that have been operating in Iran throughout the sanctions period. We just had the president of South Korea who came with a very large delegation, signed a bunch of agreements. Is there a sense of envy that Asia has a head start vis-a-vis Europe?
I'm not so sure. I think also different countries have acted differently. When it comes to a big chunk of Swedish companies, they decided to stay in the country. So it's not coming back. It's rather how do you develop from a position that you have. And of course, there are a few who are coming in. I don't think they are so not envious. They are. It's a global arena where these companies compete. Iran is not unique. It's not as unique as Iranians think, if I may be honest. This is a global market. It's a global competition, and companies that compete in any other country will compete in Iran as well. And it's good, and I think the issue, which also Susanna has alluded to, is that many of the Europeans don't give credit lines or credit frames. Sweden doesn't, because we argue it actually limits trade. And it will also be an issue to understand that some of us globally act in one way, and there's no difference in our way of dealing with Iran.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else like to jump in on that, or do you have Asia envy?
No, if I may on this.
Sure.
Well, definitely, I mean, the great advantage that these countries have, sometimes they can provide credit to really unbeatable conditions, which is, of course, something which is very difficult to compete against. But I think we have to realize also that Iran is an independent country and that wants to have relations, diversify its relations not only with a few Asian countries or others. And so we're not so afraid of China, Russia, and the others. I think precisely Iran wants to do business with everybody just to hedge a little bit its foreign policy. It's good policy, and I think there will be room for everybody to compete there, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe one other point. We talked about a highly educated Iran. They really know what our comparative strength is. So for agriculture, they will look to the Netherlands, but for the car industry, they're not going to look to my country. They know where to go. So I think that plays a role as well.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask one more question before I open up to the audience, and that is, we have in this audience, we have amazing dual nationals from Iran. Iran has exported its people very efficiently over the last 37 years, not always to the for the good of the government, perhaps, but there is this amazing expertise that lies outside the country in the form of Iranian Europeans, Iranian Americans, and so on. But we also have issues that the Iranian government has raised for some of these dual nationals. And I wanted to get an opinion from each of you about this issue as we speak. Someone that I know, Siamak Namazi, an Iranian American, and his 80-year-old father are in prison in Iran. For what reason, frankly, most of us cannot figure. It seems as though they're concocting some sort of conspiracy theory, whatever. There are other Iranian dual nationals who've also faced problems. I believe there's an Iranian French woman who is in prison, also who was arrested when she returned trying to see her mother. How much of this issue of the treatment of dual nationals, how much does this weigh on Iran's ability to reap the benefits of the JCPOA? Because if we look at a country like China, for example, or India, the expatriate community has done an enormous amount in terms of providing expertise and also capital for their countries of origin to take off economically. So who wants to touch this first?
Should I
Ambassador
begin?
Haas.
Most probably I have most experience.
Yeah.
And this issue we just could bring some double nationals, US Iranian citizens back home. I think the first thing one has to know is that Iran does not accept double nationality at all. An Iranian will stay an Iranian forever, and he cannot enter the country with his Iranian passport, and that's it. If he's getting caught, he will be treated like any Iranian, and I can pretty much vote to that from the experience I had with double nationals. Now one has to know prison life in Iran is really not something you should look forward to. But it goes for everybody, you know? The conditions are extremely hard, and the human rights record of the Islamic Republic is nothing to be proud about. Still, I see in our daily dealings money from expatriates is coming back, a little bit like in China. People are going back and forth. Some business deals are being shaped, if I may say so. We all confront the financing problem, like Francois said, domestically. Iran is dry, and externally, the banks are not playing the role they would play for, say, Vietnam or somebody different. But I expect Iran to be open to expatriates. They have an easier way with the culture, which is not very easy to comprehend as a European. So I think they will lead, some of them will lead the economic development like they did in Asia. There is not a big difference there. Some of them will not be liked, but this is a cultural and political issue. We can come back if you want.
Can I ask one more, and that is about the visa waiver issue and how much that's a problem now for your business people. As you know, the U.S. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, passed this law as part. It was part of a larger law that was one of the must-pass bills that went through Congress and was signed into law. I know that there are efforts being made now in the U.S. Congress to get rid of this provision as it deals with business people who are going to Iran and so on. But has this been a big problem that some of your business people are not going to Iran because then they would have to turn around and get a visa to come to the United States? Anyone? Yeah.
I can answer that. Yes, that's the fact. I don't know the reason behind it, if it's domestic U.S. politics. But of course, it plays a role for international companies. When it comes, I would like to add one thing when it comes to dual citizens. It's also a fact that not all dual citizens know their mother country so well as they think. They have been away for 30 years, and it's not necessarily the same. So I would still look at it. There are great possibilities, but I have examples from the big Swedish Iranian community that have you been absent for 30 years, it's another country than you may have left. And as Giulio is also saying, it's also the attitude to the country. But again, I see the Swedish Iranians, and I think most of us, as an asset, absolutely.
As we do in the United States. There are many of them in the US now. Okay, I'm going to open it up. I don't know, how much more time do we have? Somebody who's watching the clock can tell me?
You have it down there.
I do. We have lots of time. Okay, we have 18 whole minutes. So raise a hand, and gentleman right there. Let's get a microphone to you. Okay. And say if you're addressing the question to a specific ambassador, if you would. Okay.
I'll address it to the ambassador of Sweden, if I may.
There you go.
I say this because there is a large Iranian community in Sweden. I'm British Iranian, so it doesn't matter. But I suppose a lot of us in Britain observed with interest the sovereignty of European states in the face of US sanctions. My query to you is, in the face of the doomsday Trump presidency, and some of our friends here getting their way, the question is there a contingency from Europe in the face of a potential snapback, with US potentially pulling out and this international treaty being up in the air?
I shouldn't be too worried about snapback. simply because it's a long process. It doesn't happen at a snap, as you know. There's a long process.
It's not a snap.
And it could very well be managed. As far as I know, the Swedish companies are not all that worried about snapback. It is the other concerns, not necessarily what will happen in the US, but I think there is also a demand on the Europeans, three of us being EU member states, and Giulio is not. He's the odd man out, but to be frank, there also needs to be a European American dialogue. It happens, as you said, it happens already. There is also demand on those who represent us to deliver and to get a more clarification what is permissible and what is not. And again, I think the atmosphere in the public dialogue is not very conducive to taking these steps, because I agree with Giulio, much has been done. And there is still hesitation if it's reputational or not, but it needs some time. And I think on this side, the concerns is more lack of, frustration. We have to do it yesterday, and it takes some time. I shouldn't be too worried.
Okay. Gentleman right there. Wait for a microphone, if you would, sir.
I'm Michel Makinski. I'm advisor to French industry. Our experience showed that French big banks are terrified and are currently over-complying. In spite of our government's demands through the Treasury, etc., there is no results. Then my question is to all of you. There is a good sign coming from a recent statement from Federica Mogherini. As a European head of the European diplomacy, she raised the concern, and this is the first time that in Europe such a concern is raised. So I do feel that we could add some more pressure towards Federica Mogherini in this sense. First question. Second question, very short. Currently, there are negotiations on the transatlantic treaty, and we know these negotiations are not doing well. This may open opportunity from a European point of view to add more mustard, pepper, and salt, telling the US, should you keep your reputational risk threat towards your banks, we will add more difficulties in this negotiation. This may be a leverage, not a big one, but perhaps a window of opportunity. Thank you.
Is there anyone who wants to?
Let me answer as a non-EU member first. I think what most people don't understand is most European governments I'm aware of, including the Swiss government, are talking endlessly with their banks, convincing the banks to ramp up business. This is not something we don't do, but the risk assessment, at least in my country, is a private enterprise. The company in question, be it a big bank or a mid-sized bank, has to come to the conclusion, very brutally said, that there is enough money to be made, which outweighs the reputational risk, with not yet decided next US presidency. And most of my banks have come to the conclusion that they should wait just a little bit to be sure that the other side of the risk is what they perceive it at the moment. So this will not go away.
Let me stop you there and ask the others, is the fact that we're going to have an election in the United States in a few months, is that a major factor, do you think, in a lot of the hesitancy of big banks and other European companies to come to Iran or not? Ambassador, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I don't have that feeling. As we know, in election time, rhetoric is always a little bit harsher than in reality. So people might be afraid of Mr. Trump becoming the president, but he has to face the reality of a GCPOA that is there. I didn't hear from our banking sector that they are factoring this in at the moment. They're basically, as Giulio is saying, seeing what the development is and whether the cost will or the benefits will outweigh the cost.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to add that, don't forget there are also elections in Iran next year, which may have just a greater impact, really. So I agree with you, sort of. What I hear from Swedish business is Trump, no Trump. This is not the issue. It's more what will happen in Iran during the next year.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. I've also not heard concerned about the American elections, I must say. But what I would like to say is that European governments and the European Commission and Federica Mogherini, also the High Representative, they are really committed, to fulfilling their side of the deal. And all what you see, all these delegations who are going to Tehran, all these discussions, the fact also there was, and the president is sitting here next to me, is clearly a sign that Europe wants, to start again having diversified relations with Iran. And politically, we are all trying to send this same signal. But now, as has been said, there is also, of course, the economic decision which has to be taken by the operators. And this is something which is going to take some time, because it would take time in any circumstance, in any pay, in a country. Re-entering a market is always a difficult decision to take. It's only a few months. So, I think we have to be realistic about the time it will take, but there should be no doubt that we are fully 100% behind this, definitely.
Very good. Any other questions in the audience? Yes. Wait for the microphone, please, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate what have been said about the Iran, and also you mentioned about the dual citizen people. As you know, we do have more than 3 million Iranians staying out of the country, and most of them have dual citizenship. And at least I would say that 100,000 of them are traveling to Iran every year. So if a couple of them have some problem, which we are not aware of that, we don't know the reason why, it's probably 1 per 10,000 or 1 per or 2 per 100,000, that might not be a big issue. We do not have any information about why this is happening to them.
Do you have a question?
No,
I appreciate your comment.
The question that I was going to raise, it was the first comment which I had. Also, you mentioned that there is no problem with the snapback, which I'm happy to hear. But I was also want to comment that for the correspondent banking relationship, even if they are afraid of that, the position of this relationship doesn't create any risk for them. We are not asking for financing in the first place. I was wondering that for financing of the ECA coverage that the banks could have, what do you see the impact of this financing on development and growth of economy in European countries, concentrating on investment in Iran, considering large amount of investments in infrastructure that we need to have? What would be the impact of these projects in Iran on their counterparts companies in European countries?
Ambassador Taylor, why don't you take that? A lot of Swedish companies would like to invest in Iranian infrastructure.
Well, if they are willing to invest in the infrastructure, I'm not so sure, to be honest. But I don't think again, this is a big deal, because I think there are two things one should add to what we have not been saying. We have seen all these great plans. I think what is being questioned, will everything be implemented? That's one question. And then I think that we have not addressed some of the major challenges in Iran. I know that my colleague from UN will speak about it tomorrow. The big challenge is, for example, the water issue and the whole environmental issue. And one should not forget that don't focus only on this. The challenge is, at least when you live there and when you cough in Tehran in February, then you realize that there are many challenges. There are all these plans, and I think there is still a need for us to understand what is implementable. And the figures mentioned for investments, starting with the Airbuses and things like that, it also raises the question, will it be possible to raise all that money? And how will the government really prioritize more than this. So I don't see this as frankly a big issue.
Okay. Yes, I see two hands in the back. That gentleman, yeah. Wait for the microphone. Let me take this gentleman first, and then Ambassador Terzi. You'll get the next one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ambassadors. I'm sure all of you know that ever since July 14th, there have been many delegations visiting Iran, trying to explore the markets and for any future business transactions or business investment in Iran. And I've been in position to receive many of these delegations, and you know it very well. And I have detected personally, when I was coming across, to discuss with company managers or their representatives, there are great interest on the side of the companies, to enter into the Iranian market. And
do you have a question, sir?
Yes. My question is that during the sanction time, especially the last few years, the business look of Iran went toward the east. And we have developed our businesses with the Chinese, with the Koreans, with Indians, and so on and so forth. And there are plans for at least absorbing $50 billion per year until the next 5 years at least for direct investments in order to develop the economy. And the Chinese and
question.
Yes, I'm reaching to that. The Easterners are coming in, whereas all these, let's say, European companies, European business delegations have visited Iran ever since July 14th, and the interest of very much into the getting into the Iranian market. Don't you think? Not the question. Don't you think that there is great extreme conservatism on the part of the European governments not to anger the Americans in order to engage with Iran in business activities, or don't you think that you are going to lose, let's say, the opportunities that exist there, and whereas the Chinese
I think we get it.
are coming in?
Yeah. Is there anyone who thinks that it's fear of the Americans that's keeping your businesses out of Iran? Yes, Ambassador Terstal.
Well, first of all, it's not our governments that tell businesses what to do. Our governments are facilitators. And I think for most governments that here is the same. We invite business delegations in. We look very much like what is a good sector for the businesses in our countries. Where do we have a comparative advantage? And we invite those businesses. Those businesses invite themselves to come with a minister or a deputy minister to Iran. They feel the atmosphere. They look what is going on. And then they make a business decision whether to invest in Iran or not. It's not the government. And I think we've had now 3 or 4 business delegations already from the Netherlands. My minister is coming with another delegation at the end of this week. I don't think our government can be called conservative in coming to Iran.
Okay, Ambassador Delhaye, you want to say
Well,
something?
I must say on this that we don't really feel any pressure from the United States. And there was a clear change the day the GCPOA was signed. Before, even though it became apparent a few months ago that GCPOA would ultimately be signed, the Americans indeed, until the very last moment, really until the signature, were sending signals, don't go too fast, don't go to Iran. They were really trying to apply pressure and slow us down. But frankly, since it has been signed, we have not received any such signal. From the US administration, they have signed this deal, and as far at least as Belgium is concerned, we have not received one single démarche or whatever telling us, look, go slow on Iran. I mean, quite the opposite. I must say, I get the feeling that they are also playing the game according to the rules, and so we don't really have this pressure.
Yes, Ambassador Haas.
Yeah, I have never seen such a rush to a market like I have seen in the last 9 months since the nuclear agreement has been signed from all European countries, with a lot of government involvement. The Swiss president was in Iran the first time ever. It's not a surprise that we have seen almost any exporting European country being in Iran in strength. Saying that we are afraid of the American misses simply the point. Iran will stay a huge political risk. I tried to allude to that in a former sentence, and this risk will not go away overnight. So business needs to assess this risk, like any risk out there in the marketplace, and has then to compare it to other countries, other risks, and comes then to the conclusion it's good enough to invest or it's not good enough to invest. But I really think that the governments of all European partners have done a tremendous lot to help Iran getting over this difficult first phase.
Okay. We're almost out of time, and I did promise Ambassador Terzi that he could have the last words. So please, would you make it a question, because we heard your statement already this morning, so don't repeat yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Slavin. I try never to repeat myself, and you are very kind in saying that it will be the first time in my life that I'm going to have the last word.
No, they will, but ask the question.
The question is that High Representative Mogherini came to Tehran a couple of weeks ago, and she stated, together with the Iranian foreign minister, that dialogue on human rights was proceeding. My question to the ambassador of the Netherlands, due to the prominent position of your government, the Dutch government, in this matter, and also the position that the Netherlands is having currently in the European Union, is this aspect of accountability, but better the view that European companies have of the situation of human rights and the kind of corporate responsibility that they may incur into in dealing maybe with not complete acceptable entities. Is this aspect sufficiently well known to the Iranian authorities, the kind of sensitivity that exists in Europe and among the European businesses is well known and fully appreciated, in your opinion?
Well, for me, it's hard to say what the Iranian government knows or doesn't know. What I do see is that there's a sincere attempt at having a human rights dialogue between the EU and Iran, not only between the EU and Iran, but I think most of our countries are talking about human rights as well. As we say, we want to have a broad relationship, and human rights is one of the factors. Corporate social responsibility is something that all our companies deal with, and they're really two different things. How you work within your company, that is about corporate social responsibility. How, as a government, you deal with the people in the country, that is a human rights issue.
Okay. Last word?
Maybe on this matter of human rights, because it's indeed very important also for my country. But one thing we have to recognize is, I mean, there's probably not been as much pressure on the human rights issue on any countries but Iran. Basically, I mean, the international community over these last many years have tried everything possible, I mean, just also to help improve the situation of human rights, because it's not completely satisfactory. And so embargoes, you know, I mean, resolutions, condemnations of all kinds. So it's not like the international community hasn't tried to work with Iran to improve this. We have done it. But this also has to be seen in a larger context. Because in this region, I mean, human rights situation is bad, worse, terrible, appalling. I mean, you choose the names. Yeah. And so definitely this is a concern for our countries. It's a concern for companies. But I would be reluctant to single out Iran too much in this regard. I mean, we have to be fair also. And one thing we do not want to do, at least in our country, is to use this issue to reach other goals. So it is very fair to have this dialogue on human rights with Iran. It's very necessary, but it should be for the sake of human rights. And so I think this is what we are pursuing.
That's a very good answer. All right. Thank you all. Our time is, we are over time, I'm sorry, and so we'll go on to the next. Thank you, Ambassador, so much. Very good discussion. It was very good.